Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Thank you, Hubert, and good afternoon to everybody. During the introduction, I was feeling intimidated and humbled to be part of this group. So I'll give you a bit of my thoughts and my recommendations on infrastructure. A couple of things I'd say first. Number one, I mentioned this last week when I spoke, is that with all the furor and all of the activity and all the focus on, and rightly so, on solutions to the COVID-19 endemic, I think it's also very important that we as holders of institutional capital don't allow ourselves to be sucked into providing funding for things which ultimately are best handled by the donor community and subsidized funding. So we can be a very good conduit, and we can be a very good vehicle to make sure that responses to this pandemic go more smoothly and do our part. But I think it's very important that at the end of the period of time, we haven't lost our firepower in terms of the capital that we have for some of the long-term considerations. So the way I've interpreted this recommendation, this topic, is what is it that we as a group, playing to the audience here of sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, can do to attract and sustain more investment in infrastructure assets in our respective countries around the continent. And I think for something like this, I think we have to be honest. We have to look back and ask ourselves what has happened, what has worked, and what has not worked, and why in terms of attracting investments. The old phrase is often said that the challenges with infrastructure in Africa is not a money issue. It's really a bankable projects or the right kind of projects issue more than a lack of capital. So we have to ask ourselves some of the hard questions, which is why have we not unlocked more financing, and why have we not essentially closed more infrastructure financing transactions that can facilitate our development? And we actually do. You can even go one step further. Over the last, I'd say, decade, there's been a number of Pan-African infrastructure funds that have been established to try and address these issues. And many of them have struggled to deploy capital, and let's say the results have been very mixed. So that's one of the areas and the issues that I think we have to be frank and ask ourselves. So when I look at this issue, I ask myself, what if I had some infrastructure opportunities in Ghana? How can I use this august group around the screens now to actually raise some financing for that? Or potentially my counterpart in Nigeria or Kenya or Senegal or Morocco, can we use this platform or this group of people, this group of institutions to facilitate the investment flows? And I think that's the basis of what we need to discuss. Just to give you 2 minutes on the experience of my institution. So the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund was set up with $325 million of capital from the government of Ghana. And it was put in a permanent investment capital vehicle, essentially with the mandate to invest and develop more infrastructure assets in Ghana, really try and bring other people's money into Ghana to invest alongside the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. It's actually quite a unique model in Africa in the sense that how often do you know governments who provide a large amount of capital and then allow the day-to-day decision making to be taken by non-government people? And that's the model that we're trying to implement here. So we, even though we have government money, we price for risk, we do thorough due diligence, we see the world the way other investors see the world. And if a project doesn't meet our risk and our return criteria, we pass it, even though it's government money. And I think that's probably one of the cornerstones of how we can be successful. When I look at most of the other institutions across this screen, most of the other pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, they also have a return obligation. They also don't want to lose the funding. So If I can prepare transactions that fit my criteria, that solve my issues, I think it may be more easy for me to attract some of you investors who have if you have the mandate to invest outside of your respective countries, to come alongside me and invest with me in my infrastructure transactions. And vice versa, I suspect. If I was allowed to invest in Egypt or Morocco, but I was introduced to the transaction by the local sovereign wealth fund who had done the initial work, structured it to my criteria, and was coming alongside me, that would probably facilitate my approval process to invest more faster. And I think we don't do enough of that. And that's one of the areas that I think we should explore on this particular topic. The other thing I would say is just quickly, in 3 years, the Ghana Infrastructure Fund, we've managed to invest $240 million of that $325 million in a portfolio of 8 infrastructure assets across Ghana, from the new airport terminal to the expansion of a new port, to tourism sector projects, to ICT, building a whole new broadband fiber across half of the country. And for each of our investments, I'm very proud to say that for every dollar that we have put in as the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, we've managed to raise $10 of other people's money to invest alongside us. So I think our model works. And if I could just say what I think has been the key facets as why this has been successful and is interesting, is because we all know in our respective countries, particularly in Africa, that infrastructure investments don't follow a textbook path. It's not a question of you put all of the right numbers and the right descriptions on a platform and then people come and invest. There's nuances. There's the relationship with government. There's vested interest that you have to manage. There's sources of capital, local and international, which have to be carefully managed. There's the quality of the sponsors. There's all of these issues that are very important that don't always come out when you're looking at a description of a transaction. And the other big elephant in the room that I've noticed is that what kills a lot of us in the investment community is the time that we spend on projects that don't close. And the reasons why they don't close isn't because the project is not fundamentally sound. It's because there's probably some vested interest or some invisible person in a suit somewhere in the realms of government who's threatened by this project and doesn't want it to happen for whatever reason. And it's up to, I would say, institutions like ours on the ground who can really get an understanding of those dynamics, and through careful selection, we'll know there's no point spending time on project A, even though it looks fantastic. It's not going to be allowed to close. So we focus on project B and C. And that is the insight that I can bring for Ghana, anybody interested in investing in Ghana. If anybody has tried to invest in Ghana, you'll realize a couple of things. That Ghana, although on the surface looks like a very easy place to do business, when you actually try and do specific transactions, it's very difficult. And many transactions that look good don't actually close. So I think that is something that we can share and work amongst ourselves to increase the success rate of closing infrastructure investments. So that's what I wanted to raise for discussion, for people's thoughts. I think there's probably 3 questions that we want to ask ourselves. One is, how can we amongst ourselves, show each other interesting investment opportunities that have already been screened by knowledgeable people? It may not be you yourself in the country, but you know of an institution that has done the preliminary work and is satisfied, and they work to a high standard. How can we show each other these types of transactions? Then how can we second question, how can we co-invest together more easily? Are there regulatory barriers or other barriers that prevent us from investing across our borders, for example? And are there ways that we can identify what some of those barriers are? And then thirdly, exploit or provide possible solutions to solve some of those barriers. So those are the three questions that I think we should try and cover. And Hubert, that's my 5 minutes introductory on my topic. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.